Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most trusted voice in true crime. July 23rd, 2018 was a Monday, 2 years ago today. It was exactly 3 Mondays away from the murder, if we include the Monday of the murder. So what I think we can say almost for certain, and you'll see why as we go through this episode, is that already 3 weeks earlier, Chris Watts had begun his process of premeditation. In other words, 3 weeks prior to the triple murders and the murder of Nico, Chris Watts was thinking about getting rid of his family permanently. Before we get to today's episode, and today's episode will be very brief just because the timeline is just, I think, 5 very brief entries. Before we get to that, I want to thank the 50 odd people who have joined True Crime Rocket Science on Patreon. Some of them have joined on the $5 tier to listen to the audiobooks, and others have joined on other tiers, $1, $2, and so on. Welcome to you guys. Also want to thank those who've subscribed in the last couple of days. If you haven't subscribed yet, you may notice a blue face looking at you in the bottom right hand corner. Just move your icon over there and click on it and click subscribe. And let's get started. So it is quite a haunting thought. It is quite a haunting thought that this was a Monday, July 23rd, and exactly 3 weeks from this day, everything would change forever for almost everybody in the story. And in a very fundamental way, you know, their lives would never be the same in a fundamental way. It would be an event that would shake Colorado and to some extent America. It would shake people. It would rattle their bones that something like this is actually possible. That the scale of such a nightmare could exist within what appeared to be such a picture-perfect fairy tale. And I think the reason why it's so disturbing is because of the dissonance. The nightmare is as dark and lurid and terrible as the fairy tale is vivid and pretty and sweet and charming. Does that make sense? On the one side, you've got the technicolor of Thrive, you know, these neon colors, the sort of fresh, vigorous thing going on. You've got these young people, you know, and kind of living in an idyllic suburban setting, right? Sun-splashed sidewalks, lawns that are just sort of, you know, verdant lawns, people barbecuing and, you know, living the good life. And then on the other extreme, the sort of remote oil tank sort of hulking on this sort of tawny landscape. And just the horror that, you know, surely you couldn't actually even fit children into those tanks. And then it turned out that he could, that they were inside, that this horror did actually take place, that they didn't just vanish, that they were made to disappear. One thing that I think has not been thought about very much is to what extent the nightmare of this case, I'm talking about everything that happened. What happened to Shanann? What happened to the children? What happened to the unborn baby? What does that nightmare mirror? Now I think many might just think, well, yeah, it mirrors a sick man. It mirrors a spineless man. It's much more than that. It's not just a person that out of a vacuum became who he became. This nightmare mirrors another nightmare. What was that nightmare? What is this nightmare that he was trying to escape from, that he took such desperate and dark action, dark shadowy action. If we start with the timeline, July 23rd, 2018, as I say, was a Monday. It started the same way most weekdays did during the 5 weeks Shanann and the kids were away. Shanann called him at the crack of dawn, catching him just before he went to work. She called him at 8:40, just slightly later than usual, and they had a 2-minute conversation. Who knows what they said during that conversation? Perhaps it was a perfunctory conversation, just like someone's going to call you later, and blah blah blah. I'll get to that in a second. Later at work, presumably, Watts transferred another image of Kissinger into his secret calculator app now, and that was at about I think 8:25. So what I want to emphasize here is, as soon as Watts is at work, he sort of feels kind of like the coast is clear. Shanann's not going to call him. She's not going to call him from the time that he's at work right through the afternoon until he gets home. So work is kind of a safe place for him. Work is kind of a chance to get a bit of relief from his unhappy marriage. And not only that, work is somewhere he probably wants to go to, because not only does he get away from being at his home where he doesn't want to be, irrespective of the fact that his family aren't there, he doesn't really want to be home. He wants to be with Kissinger, and she's there. She has an office, in the Platteville hub, and otherwise he's at her home, and he just wants to be with her, and he's thinking about it constantly. His thoughts are about her, and things are coming to a head now. Shanann calls him, then he gets a photo or a selfie from Kissinger, and he's starting to be torn apart. He needs to make a decision. He needs to decide what he's going to do. He needs to fix things. So anyway, at 8:25 that morning, Watts transfers an image of Kissinger into his secret calculator application. Once again, what I'm getting at is, when he doesn't do this at home, he does it when he gets to work, and there he's comfortable. And just think about the same thing. Watts uses his work, his access to the well site, the infrastructure there that is not very accessible to other people. He uses that to hide away what he's about to do. He uses the fabric of Anadarko's infrastructure, the sort of anonymity of the landscape that they are leasing or using. He uses that to transfer the bodies of his family into the fabric of the topsoil and the oil in order to make them disappear. In the same way that he's making images of Kissinger disappear into his secret calculator application that he wants to keep. He wants to make the bodies of his family disappear, but where they're going to be safe. In other words, where someone's not going to stumble on them very easily. And that's what I think people don't often understand or realize with certain kinds of crimes. There are certain crimes where the body is totally destroyed, as you saw in the Patrick Frazee case. Not only was the crime itself incredibly vicious, but the disposal was as well. The disposal was quite heartless, actually incinerating the body while you're standing there. Whereas what Chris Watts did in terms of the execution of the crime, I'm by no means saying murder is gentle or kind or anything like that, just that there are different levels of sadism and there are different levels of violence. And Watts's crime was far quieter and more careful and measured and controlled and reserved. You kind of get the idea with Frazee that he took gratuitous pleasure in the violence that he inflicted on poor Kelsey Bereth. Whereas Watts, I think, felt differently. I think he felt more a sense that he always felt. He felt inhibited. He was trying to keep it a secret. He was trying to hide it away. Even in the way he committed the crime, I think that's how he committed it. It was an introverted execution of a crime, if I can put it that way. There wasn't a lot of shouting. There wasn't arguing. There wasn't wide eyes looking at him when it happened. So I'm just trying to compare this transferring of images constantly into a secret calculator app to this, in other words, this digital transfer of life from one reservoir to another. I'm comparing that to the transfer of actual living bodies from actual tissue and flesh to the dissolution of that tissue and flesh, where the tissue and flesh goes from tissue and flesh to dust, from blood to dust, from blood to oil. And I'm just comparing that. I'm giving you an analogy of that transferring of images of a real person, digital images of a real person, into a secret calculator app. They're there, but you can't see them. And how this is an analogy for how he possibly started plotting his premeditated, not so much the murder, but the aftermath, what he's going to do with the bodies. I think there were two aspects. There was, okay, I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill them quietly. How can I also get rid of their bodies quietly? How can I hide it that no one's going to even suspect anything? At 1702, so sometime after Watts returned home, maybe as much as an hour and a half, Watts called Nicole Utoft. Now, how is that for a weird milestone? 3 weeks before the murders, Watts calls Nicole. She would call him 3 weeks later. And he wouldn't really want to hear from her. In fact, he would actually put the phone down saying, I'm too busy, I can't talk to you. And then she'd call him back. In any event, she calls him. And who knows what they talk about. Perhaps he's calling to sort of discuss another sort of promotion on Thrive, like he did with Christina Meacham. That's one possibility. Was it to do another Thrive promo? I don't think so. I know when I wrote this post that was something I considered. But what I actually think it was Watts probably called Nicole to ask her if she would be available to dog sit Dieter. Now, bear in mind, although the murders occurred 3 weeks later, Watts would leave Colorado 1 week after this date. So around about the next Sunday or Monday, Watts would be leaving Colorado. And so Monday was a good day to sort of start getting the ball rolling in making just ordinary practical arrangements. You can also understand why Shanann wanted that garage sensor fixed, because at one point the house would be completely empty, and for quite a long time, for about a week. So it made sense to have the place secure when Watts left, and that, I think, was part of it. The other part, as I say, was they needed someone to look after the dog, and we know that Nicole did. Also, Nicholas did as well. They dog sat while Shanann and Watts and the family were in North Carolina for that week. So at 1736, around about half an hour later, Shanann called Watts and had a 9-minute conversation. Now, probably what happened is Watts called Nicole Atkinson, asked, will you dog sit? And discussed everything, and okay, I'll meet you then. I'm leaving at that time. I'll give you the key, the dog food's there. I'll show you where the dog is, or use this key code for the garage, whatever it was. And after the conversation, which wasn't very long, Shanann then called him and spoke to him for 9 minutes, probably calling him after Nicole had called her. Possibly, Nicole probably called her to say, well, look, Chris has just called me. Yes, it's fine, blah, 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 right? At 18:02, so another half hour after that, Watt searched Google for clean eating restaurants near me and near Erie. Watt's also searched 24 Carat Bistro and Lazy Dog Restaurant. Now this is why I've mentioned this thing about premeditation. We know that Watts went to the Lazy Dog Restaurant on the Saturday prior to the murders. That very last Saturday he was with Kessinger. Now, the 24 Carat Bistro was a restaurant he'd also searched online for on July 14th, so around about 9 days earlier. So it was obviously a favorite of Kessinger's, and it's quite close to Boulder, I think, 10 miles south of the Shelby Museum, located on 578 Briggs Street in Erie. And so obviously he was thinking of going there again, right? And the question is, when? Was he going to go there that night, or were they going to go there on the way back from the sand dunes? And I think he was starting on the Monday already, because he's thinking about the week is this is effectively his last week with Kessinger before everything's going to be different. You know, he's going to spend this last week with Kessinger. Then he goes to North Carolina for a week, and when he comes back, Shanann's there. Shanann's going to be there. The kids are going to be there. So he wants to make, although he wants to make the weekends count, he really also wants to make this final week count as well. And so he is possibly making restaurant reservations, perhaps even every night, or several nights. And he really wants to wine and dine her in this last week. And I think there's also a sense from both sides perhaps that they want to keep one another. And so once he leaves, she could lose him. Once he leaves, he could lose her. And so they both sort of really want to be together as much as possible and have an enjoyable week. And that's why I say, because of that, you also have the flip side, which is the sense of foreboding and the sense of premeditation starting to creep up on him. How can I get rid of them? I don't want my family anymore. I want her. I don't want them. What am I going to do about this? So at the beginning of this episode, I asked you, what do you think is the flip side, the analogy, the mirror image to the nightmare of the crime itself, what was done to the bodies? What do you think is the analogy to that, the mirror image to that? I'm going to let you think about that. Try to answer it in the comments. Bear in mind, this is the penultimate episode of this series, hashtag 2 years ago today, on this channel. Tomorrow, July 24th, will be the last day. I might put up a little teaser on the 25th, but otherwise it moves, the last 3 weeks really moved to Patreon on the $1 tier. So if you haven't moved over there, please do. It's Patreon/TCRS. We'd love to see you there. Bear in mind, you can also visit the Crime Rocket 2 blog and click on the What's tab to go through the timeline by yourself if you would like to do that. That won't cost you anything. And if you find it interesting, you find some of the analysis there interesting, you're welcome to also click on the narratives that are alongside, where it is put forward in a far more detailed way and in a far more cohesive way. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys tomorrow on July 24th for the final episode in this series on this channel before it moves over to Patreon.